So some time ago, when I was listening to my favorite preacher, one of my favorite preachers, he said something that really caught my eye. He said this, that when I was beginning my ministry, I asked God for three things only that I asked God for that would guarantee me any influence or effectiveness in the work that God was calling me to do. The first thing he prayed God for, he asked God for wisdom. The second thing, he asked God for the Holy Spirit. And the third thing, he asked God for favor with God and favor with men. And that really caught my eye because I was like, oh, interestingly, why did he ask for favor? Is favor that important? And as I was mulling over this, as I was thinking about this, then I remembered a memory verse that we kept on reciting growing up in Sunday school. And the memory verse was this, that it is in Luke 2:52. It says this, and Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with men. And so I wondered, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, he needed to have favor with God and men. Why? And then I realized that maybe this thing has much more importance than I grant it, that maybe I should study more about this favor. And I became a student of favor. I desired for God to give me favor. I realized that in this world, you cannot be effective, cannot be successful in the mission that God has given you unless God gives you favor with God and favor with men. God today gave me a new revelation on favor, on how to get favor. And that's why this video is a video on how to get favor. And so if you have ever desired, like me, to get favor from God and favor from men, then watch this video. It is a story of a young girl called Esther. Esther was an exile. She was a refugee brought in, living in Babylon that was being ruled by the kingdom of Persia. And so just a backstory, a few months before she enters the story, there's a king Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus was the king of Persia. He was the king of the world. And Ahasuerus, during a 7-day party, he's high with wine, and he sends his eunuchs to go and bring him the queen for him to parade her beauty before the men who are reclining with him at the table. And lo and behold, Queen Vashti, who was the beautiful queen of Persia, she rejects the request of the king and she doesn't show up. And the king gets mad and furious, and she's deposed of her crown as queen. The nobles, or the subjects of King Ahasuerus, then they begin the task of looking for the next queen. And so they go around the 127 provinces of Persia and they pick the most beautiful women and they put them in a harem and they put a eunuch who's going to be in charge of them. And I want to read about what happened to Esther after she was picked. It's in Esther 2 from verse 8, and it says this. It was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. She pleased him and she obtained his favor. He readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maid servants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maid servants to the best place in the house of the women. Wow. And so Esther here, we see her, she is just an exile. She's not a local woman, she's a refugee. And here she comes amidst a harem of women, a beautiful women. Just imagine the preparations of Miss World. You know how they gather women from all over the world. The harem at Citadel looked something of the same, whereby there are all these beauties from all over the world gathered in a place for them to go through a 1-year preparation for them to become a queen. As they go through skin treatment, as they go through being taught about how the palace operates, protocol, you know, where the fork and the knife goes, they go through a 1-year preparation. And here, interesting thing is that Esther stands out. And the one who is in charge, who is a eunuch, who is in charge of all these women, he's pleased by Esther. And he gives her such preferential treatment that I wondered, man, this was too much. Man, he was just obviously showing that This is my favorite. And when I was reading that, God told me, Ben, that exactly is what favor is. That exactly is what favor is, me picking a favorite. It is as simple as that. Favor is very unfair. By the way, if you can really, really think about it, there were these other women, beautiful as her, maybe even more beautiful than her. Why is it that Haggai, who was the custodian of these women, picked Esther, who was a refugee, amongst all these women who were born and bred in Babylon? She didn't have the exotic hair that they had. She didn't have the exotic mannerisms that they had, but she stood out and she was picked. That is what favor is. That is why for me, I believe that you can work hard your whole life, but just one moment of favor will give you advantage over 1,000 years of labor. That Esther here, she gets a head start. She's given 7 maids just to take care of her. She's given preferential treatment. She's taken to the best place. And so that's God. So God, how can I get this favor? How is this favor distributed? Does God have favorites? Does God decide you, Ben, you'll get favor and your brother will not? How does someone get favor? Is favor a thing that is spread randomly? Or how does God pick those whom he wants to favor? And God led me to a very interesting verse in James 4. James is a book of wisdom. It is like Proverbs. If you are a student of wisdom, then one of the things, even as you read Proverbs, a proverb a day, read also James. James has a lot of practical wisdom that you can apply in life for success. So James 4:6 gives us the key, gives us the secret on how to get favor, because favor comes from God. And so if you ever want to get favor, then James 4:6 is your verse. It says this, James 4:6 says this, but God resists the proud. Wow. But God resists the proud. And the second part, but he shows favor to the humble. God resists the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. That will mean that unlike Vashti, who was deposed because of her pride, because of not coming at the beck and call of her husband, Esther, on the other hand, was an exile. She was a refugee. She felt she did not come there from a high point. She came there lowly, feeling like, hey, man, I don't deserve to be here. Man, I'm just here by grace. And because of her lowly stature, then God lifted her up. Then God gave her favor. Favor is not just distributed randomly. Favor is a byproduct of humility. Humility is what gives birth to favor. Because you know what humility does? Humility lifts up. The lifting up of humility is as a result of favor. That because you make yourself small, then it gives space for God to be God and for God to lift you up. That is why all through the Bible, through the stories of Joseph, him being shown favor before Pharaoh, a prisoner, while in Pharaoh's court, there were all these wise men, people with degrees and PhDs, but yet the person who was promoted to prime minister was a prisoner because of his humility. That will mean, guys, that for you to be able to get favor before God and before men, then you must humble yourself before God and before men. That your humility is what gives you favor. But your pride, which is so inherent in us, pride is the antidote. Pride is the killer of favor, like what Vashti did. Pride always brings down. Bringing down is such a lack of favor. And if you are like me and you desire lifting, you desire favor before God and before men, then James 4 gives us the key and the secret. Humble yourself, therefore, before God and before men. And in due season, God shall show you his abundant, fair, extravagant favor. Till next time, guys, may God bless you.